"Get off my porch, Mother. I have a family now." That's what Gregory said to me, my son. The boy I carried through storms of sacrifice. The same child I stayed awake with when he had fevers. The one I fed when I hadn't eaten myself. He didn't even let me step inside. I stood there, my coat still damp with smoke from the fire that had devoured my house just hours earlier. My hands trembled, not from the cold, but from disbelief. My knees buckled slightly, but I didn't fall. Not yet. The porch light above him flickered like it too, was unsure whether to keep burning. "Gregory," I whispered, "I have nowhere else to go." He crossed his arms, jaw clenched. His wife stood behind him, arms folded, her eyes full of something colder than winter. Disgust. "This isn't a retirement home. We have kids. We can't deal with your situation," he added, as if I were a mess left in a gutter. My breath caught. Not from anger, not yet, but from the sheer humiliation of it. Before we continue, make sure you're subscribed and share where you're listening from. We love knowing how far these stories reach. The fire had taken everything. My photo albums, my mother's old necklace, the quilt I stitched through winters while Gregory studied in college. Even the wooden spoon I used to stir soup when money was tight, and hope even tighter. I'd escaped with just a small suitcase and the key to nothing. After he slammed the door, I sat on the porch step. My fingers still smelled like ash. I pressed the cool brass key into my palm, even though the house it belonged to now lay in charred ruins. It was all I had left, and not just a house key, but a symbol. That key had opened not only my front door, but every meal I'd cooked, every birthday I'd hosted, every lullaby I'd sung in that home. I held it to my chest like a relic. The street was silent. It was nearly midnight. I remembered how Gregory used to cry if I wasn't beside him when he woke at night. Now he wouldn't even offer a blanket. My legs moved on their own, walking me away from his porch. I didn't want his neighbors to see me in that state. Smoke-smeared, broken, rejected. I passed a row of trees, still golden with autumn. A gust sent their leaves fluttering like a quiet applause for my dignity. The only thing I had left. I walked without knowing where I was going, only that I couldn't go back. I found a cheap roadside motel by sheer instinct, the kind with a flickering neon sign and an empty parking lot. The manager didn't ask questions. He looked at my soot-streaked face, took the last few bills I had stuffed in my coat, and handed me a key without a word. Room 6. Inside, the air was stale, the walls yellowed with time and smoke. I sat on the edge of the vinyl chair, too stiff to lie down, too wired to cry. I opened my suitcase and laid out what little had survived. A sweater Gregory gave me one Christmas. I used to wear it proudly. Now it felt like a joke. A cracked frame with a photo of us from his college graduation. He had his arm around me then. He'd called me his rock. That was before he met Linda. The sound of a toilet flushing in the room next door startled me. I clutched my coat tighter and looked around the dim room, its single lamp casting long shadows. The silence was heavy, thick with questions I didn't want to ask myself. I reached for the motel phone. My hand hovered over the receiver. Who would I even call? Everyone I'd once known was either gone or part of Gregory's world now, and that world had no room for me. So I just sat, eyes open, heart slowly cracking in a place where even the wallpaper looked forgotten. I woke up just after 5. The motel mattress had left my back sore, but I was grateful for its weight beneath me. It meant I hadn't frozen outside. In the small motel lobby, a makeshift breakfast bar offered cold toast, old coffee, and bruised bananas. I took one of each. The coffee was bitter, like medicine without a cure. A man in a construction vest nodded at me as he poured sugar into his thermos. He didn't know me. No one here did. And somehow, that anonymity felt safer than family. I ate slowly, watching the morning light struggle to push through the dirty glass door. That's when I noticed her. An older woman with gray braids and a kind face, folding pamphlets behind the desk. Her name tag read, Mildred. She glanced at me a few times, not with pity, but recognition, as if she'd been where I was now. "Long night?" she finally asked, her voice soft, like a well-worn quilt. I nodded. "You could say that." She handed me a clean napkin. "Hardest part's not the night. It's waking up and remembering everything you lost." I held her gaze, swallowing the tightness in my throat. There was no point pretending. "I lost my house last night," I said, "and my son, I think." Mildred didn't ask how. She just poured me a fresh cup of coffee and whispered, "Then today's the day you start over, sweetheart. Not everyone gets that chance." And for the first time, I let myself cry. That afternoon, I walked aimlessly until I reached a small white church tucked behind rows of red maples. Its doors were open, and the faint sound of a choir rehearsal drifted into the street. I hadn't stepped inside a church in years, not since Gregory stopped believing. He used to say faith was for people who needed stories to make sense of suffering. Maybe he was right. Maybe I needed a story now. I sat in the last pew, hidden beneath my old coat. The sanctuary was nearly empty, the stained glass bathing the wooden floors in fractured light. I stared at the altar, not praying, just listening to the silence between songs. A photo fell from my coat pocket and landed at my feet. It was the picture from his graduation, the one I had packed in the motel. I picked it up slowly, as if it had become heavier in that moment. Gregory's smile in that photo was bright, full of promise, of love. I didn't know when it had disappeared from his face. Behind me, I heard soft footsteps. An older man in a gray sweater sat one pew away, respectful of the space between us. "You lost someone?" he asked gently, his eyes kind but cautious. I nodded. "My son. But not to death. Sometimes," he said, "losing someone to life hurts more." We sat in silence, two strangers bound by invisible threads of grief. And for the first time in days, I felt seen. Back at the motel, Mildred left something for me at the front desk. A blue envelope with my name written in looping script. Martha. I hadn't told her my name. Inside was a gift card to a diner down the street and a note. "You remind me of my mother. She didn't get the ending she deserved. Maybe you will. M." The kindness of strangers was something I'd never learned to expect, especially after years of giving everything to people who'd forgotten how to say thank you. I walked to the diner and sat by the window, ordering soup and tea. The warmth of the bowl in my hands reminded me of quieter days, when Gregory would come home late from school and I'd wait up just to make sure he ate something. As I ate, a mother with two young boys came in. She wiped their faces, kissed their foreheads, and told the waitress, "Whatever they want, just bring it. I'll make it work." I watched them like a ghost of my former life. I was that woman once, the one who made things work. Now I was the woman in the corner booth, alone, grieving a house and a son that still stood but no longer welcomed me. I took out the brass key from my coat pocket again and placed it on the table. The waitress noticed it, nodded toward it, and asked, "You lose your home?" I nodded, too tired to lie. She refilled my tea and whispered, "Then I hope you find something better." On Sunday morning, I woke early and dressed with care. Not for anyone else, but for myself. I put on a faded cream blouse and a navy skirt I hadn't worn since Gregory's wedding. It still carried the scent of lavender, barely, like a memory refusing to leave. I returned to the church. The service had just ended. Children were tugging at their mothers' hands, older couples walked arm in arm, and laughter echoed off the tall ceilings. I didn't belong here, but I stayed. At the back, on a bulletin board cluttered with flyers and fading announcements, one caught my eye. Volunteers needed, meals for shut-ins. I traced the edge of the paper, my fingers finding purpose in the act. My hands had made thousands of meals over decades, meals that no one thanked me for, meals Gregory ate without thinking. Now maybe I could feed someone who would remember. A woman approached me, white curls, a green dress, eyes that had seen their own share of sorrow. "You thinking of joining the kitchen crew?" she asked. "Maybe," I replied. "I have time." She smiled and handed me a pen. "Then come by Tuesday. You'll be glad you did." I signed my name. "Martha Green." She looked at the signature. "Green? That's a strong name." Strong. I hadn't felt strong in weeks, but standing there, my name written in ink, something stirred in me. Not strength yet, but maybe it's beginning. That evening, I turned my phone on for the first time in 2 days. I wasn't sure why. Maybe to punish myself. Maybe to feel something. There were 2 missed calls, both from an unfamiliar number. Then a voicemail. It was Linda's voice, my daughter-in-law. "Martha, this is Linda. I just wanted to say that maybe Gregory overreacted. The kids were scared, the fire, it just threw everyone off. I'm not saying come back, but maybe we can talk soon, that's all." I replayed it twice. Her voice was thin, carefully constructed. Not apology, not warmth, but something between duty and guilt. Gregory didn't call. It hurt more than I expected, that silence. He had always been the one who apologized late but sincerely. A crumpled drawing when he was young, a hesitant hug after slamming doors in his teens. But now, nothing. I sat on the motel bed, holding the phone like it might turn into his voice, but it didn't. I could hear Mildred downstairs laughing with someone, the clink of dishes and a country song playing on the radio. Life was still happening, just not for me. Not yet. I looked at the key again. I didn't know why I kept holding it. Maybe because it was proof I once had a home, proof I once mattered. I placed it gently on the nightstand and whispered to the silence, "He'll call, someday." But even I didn't believe that anymore. Tuesday came with a chill in the air, the kind that makes your joints ache before you've even stepped outside. I wore my thickest cardigan, the green one with missing buttons Gregory used to tease me about. "You look like a librarian from 1952, he'd say, laughing. I wore it anyway. The church kitchen smelled like onions and warm broth. Women bustled about, some chopping vegetables, others wrapping loaves of bread. It felt like a memory, not mine, but borrowed from another life. "Glad you came," said the woman in the green dress. Her name was June. She handed me a cutting board and a pile of carrots. "You've got steady hands." I smiled, thankful for the task. The rhythm of the knife, the scrape of peel against sink. It was work I knew, work that had once built a home. As we cooked, the other women shared stories. One's husband had passed. Another's son moved 3 states away and rarely called. The stories were quiet, slipped between spoonfuls and stirred pots, but they echoed my own. At one point, June leaned in and whispered, "You don't have to tell us your story, but if you ever want to, we'll listen." Tears pricked my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. Instead, I smiled and passed her the chopped carrots. Sometimes healing doesn't start with talking. Sometimes it begins with soup and the sound of other women who've also been forgotten, but refuse to disappear. That night, I returned to the motel and unpacked the last of what little I had. At the bottom of the suitcase, wrapped in a dish towel, was the photo frame, the one from Gregory's graduation. I had wrapped it in panic before escaping the fire, thinking it might keep the glass from shattering. It hadn't worked. The edges were scorched, the wood frame was blackened on one side, and the glass had cracked right through Gregory's smile. I stared at it for a long time. It felt like the perfect metaphor for us. Something once proud and whole, now fractured, half-burnt, still recognizable, but not the same. I traced the crack with my finger. That day had been one of my happiest. He had walked across that stage, and I had cried so hard that the woman next to me offered tissues. He called me his reason in his speech. The crowd had clapped, and now he had shut the door on me. I took the photo out, careful not to cut myself on the glass. I folded it once, then again, and slipped it into my coat pocket. The frame I placed back in the drawer. Some things, even when broken, deserved to be kept. But others, even precious things, had to be carried differently once they no longer protected what they used to. I turned off the lamp and lay in the dark, whispering to the night. He loved me once. I know he did. After our third morning cooking together, June offered me a ride back to the motel. As she unlocked the trunk of her old Buick, I noticed a small box wedged beside a crate of hymnals. It was labeled, "Donations, Women's Shelter." Before I could ask, she picked it up and handed it to me. "Take it. We rotate who gets first pick when there's overflow. This week, it's yours." I opened it on the passenger seat. Inside were folded sweaters, a new toothbrush, hand lotion, and a small leather-bound journal, still wrapped in plastic. My throat tightened. I hadn't written anything for myself in years. Not since Gregory was little and I'd jot down his funny sayings, how he once called thunder cloud burps. I ran my fingers over the journal's cover, smooth, brown, and still smelling of ink and fresh pages. "You look like a woman with stories," June said, her eyes on the road. "Maybe you should start writing them down." I held the journal close. "I don't know where to start." "Start with where it hurts," she said. We drove the rest of the way in silence, but something inside me shifted. It wasn't healing yet, more like pressure before a storm. But I knew then that the words had been waiting behind years of dinners no one thanked me for, behind the wedding where I sat in the back, behind the door that slammed in my face. Maybe this little book could carry what my heart no longer could. That night, in the dim light of the motel lamp, I opened the journal and began to write. "Dear Gregory." The pen paused. My hand trembled slightly, not from weakness, but from everything unspoken. So many things I never said. Not when he moved out, not when he married Linda, not even when he told me I wasn't part of their plan. "I don't know if you'll ever read this," I wrote, "but I need to say it anyway." I told him about the fire, how I barely made it out, how I watched my curtains melt and thought only of saving one photograph. I told him how cold the motel room was that first night, how it wasn't the chill that broke me. It was his silence. I reminded him of things only a mother could. The time he fell off his bike and cried not from pain, but because I wasn't there to see him fall. How he used to bring me wildflowers from the park, fists full of yellow petals and dirt. And then I wrote, slowly, "You didn't just close your door to me, Gregory. You closed it on the woman who gave you everything." By the time I signed my name, my tears had dried. The page was stained but legible. I folded the letter carefully and tucked it into the back of the journal. Maybe he'd read it one day, maybe not. But tonight, I had finally spoken, and that in itself was something. Thursday morning, the church kitchen smelled like cinnamon and warm bread. I was kneading dough when I overheard the whisper, just a fragment, but it stopped my hands. "That's the woman whose son threw her out." The words weren't cruel, but they stung all the same, said quietly with that particular tone people use when they're more curious than kind. I didn't look up. My hands kept working the dough, steady, controlled. A younger woman, Brianna, I think her name was, leaned over and offered me a tray to fill. "Ignore them," she said softly. "People talk because they don't know what to do with silence." I nodded. I wanted to tell her it wasn't the whisper that hurt. It was the truth behind it. My son had thrown me out. The fire had taken my house, but Gregory's rejection had scorched something deeper. I glanced toward the others, then back to the dough beneath my hands. "I raised him better," I murmured. Brianna placed her hand over mine for a brief second. "Sometimes they forget. Doesn't mean you failed." Her kindness struck something inside me, a tenderness I'd locked away. I blinked fast and nodded, swallowing the ache. Later, when I walked home, the streets felt sharper, like the world had overheard the whisper too. But I carried myself straighter, not proud, not yet, but no longer invisible. Let them whisper. I was still here, and I had not vanished. That afternoon, I passed a school on my walk back to the motel. Children were pouring out of the gates like water from a broken dam. Laughter, backpacks, bright jackets flashing like autumn leaves. I sat on a bench across the street and watched. I hadn't been near a school in years, not since Gregory's youngest started preschool. I wasn't invited to the ceremonies or the pickups. Linda said it confused the kids, that my presence was too much when they were adjusting to new routines. That's what they called me now. Too much. One little boy with curly hair tripped and skinned his knee. He stood quickly, his lower lip trembling. His mother came rushing over, brushing off dirt and hugging him like nothing else in the world mattered. And in that moment, I remembered holding Gregory the same way. He'd broken his arm once jumping from a swing, and I rode in the ambulance, gripping his little fingers, whispering stories so he wouldn't cry. I looked down at my hands now, wrinkled, marked with time and work. These were the hands that held him through fevers, growing pains, heartbreak, and yet they were not welcome anymore. I pulled the journal from my coat pocket and wrote, "I gave you everything I had, Gregory, and the world says that's what mothers are supposed to do. But no one prepares you for the silence when your child no longer sees you as home." I closed the journal gently. Even if no one else read it, I would remember. It was just after 7 p.m. when I heard the knock. Soft, hesitant. I wasn't expecting anyone. I opened the door slowly, my hands still damp from dishwater. Standing there was Mildred, holding a brown paper bag and a half smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Thought you could use something warm," she said. "And maybe some company." Inside the bag was chicken stew and cornbread wrapped in a napkin. I stepped aside, motioning for her to come in. She sat on the edge of the motel bed like it was a pew, hands folded, waiting to speak. "I had a son once," she said. "David, tall, sharp, full of opinions." I stayed quiet. Something in her tone told me this wasn't a story she told often. He left after my second marriage. Said I betrayed his father's memory. Never forgave me. Her voice cracked slightly, but she went on. "It's been 12 years. No calls, no Christmas cards, nothing." We sat in silence for a while. The sound of traffic humming beyond the window. "Does the ache ever stop?" I asked. She didn't answer right away, just sipped her tea and looked down at the bag between us. "No," she said at last, "but it changes shape. One day it's not a sharp pain, more like a familiar shadow." I nodded. Sometimes just knowing someone else carries a similar weight makes your own feel less cruel. We ate in quiet understanding, two mothers bound not by hope, but by history. The next morning, as I passed the grocery store downtown, I saw them. Gregory, Linda, the kids. They were walking out with paper bags full of food. A turkey, a pie box, bottles of cider. It was clear they were preparing for a family dinner. Maybe Thanksgiving, maybe just another celebration I no longer belonged to. Gregory was laughing, ruffling his son's hair. Linda glanced at her phone, barely looking up. The little girl clutched his coat sleeve, bouncing with joy. They didn't see me. I stood behind a parked van, frozen like a relic no one remembered to dust. Just last year, I'd baked that pie, set the table, laid out the children's napkins with cartoon turkeys. I used to bring them little paper crowns and tell stories while the meal cooked. My stories always made the kids laugh. Now, I was a ghost outside the glass. Gregory opened the trunk and loaded the bags. He looked older, more tired. But still, his hands moved with purpose. The same hands I had once held through night fevers and multiplication homework. Then, without warning, his eyes flicked toward the sidewalk. I stepped back instinctively, heart thudding. But he didn't see me. Or maybe he did, and just looked away. I stayed there until their car drove off. And in the stillness that followed, I whispered, not in anger, but in grief, "You still celebrate, even after burning the bridge that brought you here." And then I turned away, again. That afternoon, I walked past the church's side building, where a rusted metal bin marked "Clothing Donations" stood like a forgotten altar. I'd passed it before, always averting my eyes. But today, Something made me stop. In my arms was the green cardigan, the one Gregory used to tease me about, the one I wore through most of my adult life. Washing dishes, watching cartoons with his children, sitting quietly while everyone else laughed without me. It smelled faintly of cloves and soap. I held it close for a moment, breathing in memories. Then I opened the lid. Inside were old jackets, a pair of shoes with worn soles, a baby onesie with a faded dinosaur print. Pieces of other people's lives tucked away, waiting to matter to someone new. I stared at the sweater. My hands wouldn't let go. Not yet. I sat on the concrete beside the bin, the wind tugging at my coat, my fingers tightening around the cloth. Letting go of objects is easy. Letting go of what they represent, the years, the warmth, the small moments, that's the real grief. A church bell rang in the distance. I counted each chime like heartbeats. Then I folded the cardigan, kissed the worn collar once, and placed it gently inside. It was time. Some other woman might wear it now, maybe even laugh in it, and I hoped truly that it would warm someone else the way it once warmed me, because I was learning to keep my warmth for myself. It had been 12 days since I stood on Gregory's porch, 12 days since he closed the door on me, since the fire took my home, since I became a woman with no return address. Each night I checked my phone, not because I believed he would call, but because something in me, the same part that once waited for his baby giggle, his teenage curfew, still hoped. Tonight, the motel room was quieter than usual. Even the couple next door had gone silent. My tea had gone cold. The lamp buzzed faintly. I held the phone in my hand. My thumb hovered over his name, Gregory. I hadn't deleted it. I couldn't. I pressed it. My heart thudded once, then again. Voicemail. Hi, it's me, Mom. Silence. I'm okay in case you wondered. I've been helping out at the church. There's this woman, June. She reminds me a little of your grandma. I laughed softly. The sound felt foreign in my throat. I don't want anything from you. Not anymore, I stopped. What could I say that hadn't already been burned? So I whispered, I still love you, Gregory. That hasn't changed. And then I hung up. I didn't cry. The tears had dried up days ago. What remained was something quieter, something that lives between mourning and moving on. And somewhere deep inside, I knew, if he never calls back, I will still be me. Friday evening, June invited me to her house for supper. It was small, tidy, and smelled of rosemary and lemon. Her kitchen walls were lined with old photographs, not glamorous portraits, just life captured in faded light. You'll sit right here, she said, patting a cushioned chair. Next to the window, best view in the house. We ate roast chicken, boiled potatoes, and bread fresh from the oven. No one fussed. No one criticized the seasoning or made me feel in the way. I didn't realize how long it had been since I'd been welcomed at a table without apology. Halfway through the meal, her daughter-in-law arrived, a woman in her 40s, arms full of groceries and laughter. She kissed June's cheek and offered me a warm hello before unpacking cheese and pie crusts. They moved in rhythm, no bitterness, no edge, just belonging. I watched them like someone watching a world she used to be part of. Then, while clearing the plates, June said it so casually I nearly dropped my glass. I always wished David had seen what I see in you, but he wanted things his way. And that door, once he shut it, well, I met her eyes. The pain was there, but it no longer ruled her. You still hope? I asked. She shrugged. Not hope, just peace with what is. And that's when I realized what I'd been chasing wasn't Gregory's apology. It was peace. And maybe, just maybe, I could start finding it without him. 2 days later, a knock came at the motel door. Not soft like Mildred's, firmer, unfamiliar. I opened it to find a teenage girl holding a small envelope. Are you Martha Green? She asked, chewing her lip. I nodded. She handed me the envelope. I was told to give you this. From your grandson, Jacob. My breath caught. I hadn't seen Jacob since he was 7. He used to sit on my lap and ask me to tell the story of the purple elephant, a nonsense tale I made up to make him laugh. Linda didn't like it, said it disrupted bedtime. I opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a crayon drawing of a house. A stick figure woman stood in front with gray hair and a green dress. Below it, in crooked writing, "We miss you. Love, Jacob." No note from Gregory. No return address. Just this drawing, fragile, like forgiveness half-formed. I stared at it for a long time. The girl was still there watching me. He asked me to bring it. He didn't want his mom to know, she said quietly. Said he found your number in his dad's phone. I smiled, though my eyes were burning. Tell him. I paused, swallowing emotion. Tell him I got it, and that the purple elephant says hello. She laughed, confused but pleased. And just like that, I felt it. The first thread of something new. Not a reunion, but maybe a beginning. That night I placed Jacob's drawing on the motel nightstand beside the journal and the brass key. The 3 pieces of my life, past, memory, and what remained. I sat on the edge of the bed, the silence softer now. I could almost hear Jacob's laugh, that wild, wheezy giggle he used to make when the purple elephant sneezed peanut butter. It came to me then, like a warm tide, the story. The purple elephant lived in a tiny room with no windows, but his heart was big enough to fill a forest. I whispered it aloud, half for Jacob, half for myself. I hadn't told that story in years. I thought I'd forgotten it, but it was still there. Like so many things I thought Gregory had erased. But he hadn't. He had only closed his door. He couldn't erase me, not the stories, not the sacrifices, not the strength. I pulled the journal onto my lap and began to write again. He drew me with gray hair and a green dress. That means he remembers. Maybe not everything, but enough. The pen moved like it had waited years for this page. Love doesn't vanish, Gregory. It might hide. It might grow quiet. But it doesn't vanish. Your son still knows me. And that means somewhere in there, so do you. I stopped and stared out the window. A thin moon glowed above the power lines. It looked like a smile that had taken its time to return. Tuesday came, and with it another shift in the church kitchen. I arrived early before the others. The sanctuary lights were off and sunlight streamed through the stained glass in soft colors, red, gold, and violet across the empty pews. I sat at the folding table in the back, the one we used to portion out soups and wrap bread rolls. I brought my journal with me and Jacob's drawing. I laid them both on the table like sacred things. June arrived just before 9, carrying a basket of eggs and her usual quiet energy. "Morning," she said, placing the eggs on the counter. "You're here early." "I needed to sit with something," I said. She saw the drawing, her eyes softening immediately. "Grandchild?" I nodded. "Jacob. He sent it secretly." June placed a hand over her heart. "They remember even when their parents try to erase us." I swallowed the lump in my throat. It made me think, maybe I can forgive Gregory. Not for him, for me. She didn't respond right away. She just sat beside me, her silence giving me space. "Forgiveness isn't saying it didn't hurt," she finally said. "It's just refusing to let the hurt be the whole story." I looked at the table between us. Stained, chipped, but sturdy. Just like me. And then I said it, out loud, as if the walls needed to hear. I forgive him. It didn't fix everything, but it changed something. And for the first time, I felt a piece of my heart unclench. Later that week, I returned to the remains of my house. The fire department had long cleared the area, but the charred skeleton of what once was my home still stood in silence. I stepped carefully over cracked bricks and blackened beams, the air smelling faintly of damp ashes. I didn't come to grieve. I came for something I hoped might have survived. In the hallway, near where my bedroom had once been, I crouched by the old floorboards. I knew exactly where to look. Years ago, I had hidden a small metal box beneath a loose plank, a habit from leaner times when I didn't trust the world with my treasures. Inside that box was my mother's necklace, a simple gold locket shaped like a heart with a photo of her on one side and baby Gregory on the other. My fingers scraped and pulled, nails breaking slightly as I pried open the warped wood. And then I saw it. The box was scorched but intact. My hands trembled as I opened the lid. Inside, wrapped in the smallest piece of linen, was the locket, blackened but whole. The chain had melted slightly, but the heart was still there. I cradled it in my palm and pressed it to my chest. That necklace had been passed down through women who knew pain, who knew sacrifice, who survived. And now I would carry it forward. Not as a relic of loss, but as proof. I still had roots, even if the house was gone. That Saturday, the church held its fall bake sale. June insisted I help at the front table, though I preferred staying behind the scenes. But she said, "You've got a kind face. People will trust you." So I sat beneath the striped canopy, hands folded, smiling as children picked cookies and elderly couples debated over pies. It was peaceful, almost joyful, until I saw them. Gregory, Linda, and Jacob. They were across the street, leaving the hardware store. Gregory carried a wooden planter box. Linda walked ahead, disinterested. Jacob trailed behind, holding something in his hand. My heart skipped. I lowered my gaze quickly, unsure if I wanted them to see me or if I wanted to disappear. But Jacob saw me. He stopped on the sidewalk, eyes wide. He waved, just once, and held up the item in his hand. It was a drawing pad. My breath caught. I had once given him his first one. Gregory turned to speak to him, then followed his line of sight. Our eyes met. He froze. He looked older, more tired, maybe guilty. He nodded. Not a wave, not a smile. Just a quiet acknowledgement, like a man who had too many words he didn't know how to say. Then Linda called out, and the moment passed. They moved on, but I remained seated, my palms resting on the tablecloth, heart beating steady. For the first time, I hadn't needed to chase love down the street. It had looked back, even if just for a second. I went to the market the next day to buy flour and canned tomatoes for the church's soup kitchen. It was quiet, a late afternoon lull. I moved slowly down the aisle, tracing my list with a pencil. That's when I heard her voice. Linda. I froze by the canned beans, heart pounding. She didn't see me at first. She was at the end of the aisle, talking to a woman I didn't recognize, loud enough for anyone nearby to hear. She's living in some dingy motel now. I told Gregory we're not responsible. I mean, she's had her life. We have ours. The other woman muttered something and Linda laughed. Not cruel, just dismissive. Like she was talking about a package left out in the rain. She's just baggage, she added. Gregory needs to focus on his own family. I didn't move. I couldn't. The words hit like stones. Not sharp, but dull and deep. The kind that bruise rather than break. Then Linda turned and saw me. Our eyes locked. Her face drained. She opened her mouth, as if to explain, to twist the truth into something soft. But I raised my hand, not to wave, not in anger, just a quiet gesture, enough. I turned and walked away, leaving my cart behind. Not because I was ashamed, but because I refused to collect groceries with someone who saw me as less than human. Some silences are not empty. Some silences are shields. A few days passed before I found it. Folded beneath my motel room door was a plain white envelope with no name, just my room number scribbled in blue ink. I knew the handwriting before I even opened it. Gregory. Inside was the letter I had written him. the one I'd left in my journal, never mailed, never meant to be found. But somehow it had reached him. Maybe through Jacob, maybe through guilt. Alongside my original letter was a single page in his handwriting. It wasn't long. I don't know where to begin. What I did was unforgivable, and yet here you are, still loving me through it. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I want to learn how to be better. I miss you, Mom. And Jacob does too. I hope it's not too late. No signature, no excuses, just those words. I read it 3 times. My hands trembled, but my eyes stayed dry. Because this wasn't a grand gesture. It wasn't dramatic or polished. It was imperfect, human, and it meant he had read my pain. It meant he had seen me. I folded the note and placed it beside Jacob's drawing, next to the locket I now wore around my neck. It didn't erase the fire. It didn't rebuild the house. But it opened something I thought was locked forever. The door between us. Not fully, not yet, but enough for air to pass through, enough for light. It was June who suggested I speak to someone. Just to understand your rights, she said, handing me the card of a woman named Evelyn Marks. She's not about revenge. She's about dignity. I wasn't sure I needed a lawyer. I wasn't looking to sue Gregory or reclaim anything through courts. But part of me, the part that had been told I was too much, that I no longer mattered, needed to know I still had a name and it meant something. Evelyn met me at the church office on a rainy Thursday. She was kind-eyed, mid-50s, and spoke gently, like someone who'd sat with many broken mothers before. We went over the fire, the house, the insurance. She asked questions I hadn't thought to ask, about deeds, paperwork, whether my name had ever been removed from anything quietly. It had. Gregory had signed certain documents 2 years ago, placing the property entirely under his name. I trusted him. I didn't read every word. I was just grateful he'd helped me refinance during a difficult winter. Evelyn looked me in the eyes and said softly, "That wasn't help. That was erasure." The word hit like thunder in a quiet room. I left her office not angry, not yet, but awakened. Not just to what had been taken, but to what I still owned, my story, my truth, my voice. And for the first time, I wanted it to be heard. That night, I sat in the church library alone. The smell of old books and lemon oil comforted me. June had given me the key, said I could use the space whenever I needed quiet. I opened my journal, flipping through page after page of my story, from the fire to the front porch, from Mildred's stew to Jacob's crayon house. Every word felt heavier now, not because of grief, but because of truth. And then something rose in me. Not vengeance, not pride, but readiness. I borrowed the church copier. My fingers trembled as I pressed the buttons. I made 10 copies. 1 for Evelyn, 1 for June, 1 for myself, and maybe eventually 1 for Gregory. It wasn't about proving anything. It was about preserving something. Later, I placed the copies in envelopes and wrote a short note on the first page. This is not a letter of anger. It is a record of surviving what no one saw. A mother's silence, broken not by rage, but by remembering. I didn't sign my name, because the story wasn't just mine. It belonged to every woman whose sacrifices were edited out of the family photo, whose name was quietly erased from the deeds of her own life. I sealed the envelopes, and as I turned off the light, I didn't feel small or powerless. I felt like a witness, and that, at last, felt like enough. 2 days later, Pastor Allen called me into his office. He held one of the envelopes I had distributed, the journal pages. "I read your story," he said, folding his hands atop the worn wooden desk. "I didn't know." I nodded, unsure what to say. He looked at me with the kind of sadness that isn't pity, but reverence. The kind a man feels when faced with something unspoken for too long. "You're not just a volunteer here, Martha," he said. "You're part of the fabric, and stories like yours, they deserve more than silence." He asked if I'd speak at next Sunday's gathering, Not as a sermon, not even on the pulpit. Just a moment, a reading if I felt ready. I hesitated. My voice had been silent for so long. Would it even hold? Then I remembered the page Jacob drew. I remembered the locket, the door that had once slammed in my face. I looked at Pastor Allen and whispered, "Yes, I'll share it." He smiled, not with excitement, but with quiet understanding. And when I left his office, the sun was pouring through the chapel window in long golden stripes. I stood in the light for a moment, letting it warm my face. I wasn't chasing justice anymore. I was walking toward it, step by step, word by word. The night before I was to speak at the church, the motel phone rang. I almost didn't answer, but something told me to pick it up. "Hello?" A pause, then his voice. "Mom, it's me, Gregory." My breath caught in my throat. For a moment I didn't know what to say, so I said the truth. "I wasn't sure you ever would." He sighed. Not the dramatic kind, but the tired exhale of a man who's been holding guilt too long. "I read what you wrote," he said quietly. "All of it." Silence stretched between us. "Was it true?" he asked. I swallowed. "Yes, Gregory, all of it." He didn't argue, didn't defend. Instead, he whispered something I had waited to hear, even if I didn't know it. "I'm sorry, Mom, I failed you. I thought I was protecting my family, but I forgot you were part of it." Tears slipped down my cheeks, slow and without shame. "I'm speaking at the church tomorrow," I told him, reading part of what I wrote. He hesitated. "Do you want me to come?" I paused. "I want you to listen, whether you're in the room or not." Another silence. Then, "I'll be there." He hung up first. I stared at the receiver for a long time, heart full but unsteady. It wasn't resolution, but it was real. And sometimes, real is the first miracle. The sanctuary was fuller than usual that Sunday. Word had spread. Not about me specifically, but that someone was going to speak. Someone who wasn't a pastor. Someone with a story. I sat near the front, hands folded in my lap, the journal resting atop my knees. June sat beside me, her hand lightly on mine. Her presence steadied me like a pillar. The choir finished their final note, and Pastor Allen stepped forward. Today, we make space for a voice we don't hear often enough, the voice of a mother, a woman who's carried more than most will ever know. "Martha, when you're ready." I rose slowly. Each step up the aisle felt like climbing out of years of silence. My shoes echoed against the wooden floor. The journal felt heavier than paper. It felt like memory. I reached the podium and looked out. Faces, women, men, teenagers, strangers. And then, in the back pew, Gregory. He stood alone. No Linda, no children, just him. His hands were in his pockets, eyes locked on me. I opened the journal and found the page. I read aloud. "Love doesn't vanish. It might hide. It might grow quiet. But it doesn't vanish. And even after the fire, even after the door closed, I remained. A mother. Whole, wounded, and still standing." The room was silent. And for the first time in years, my voice did not tremble. Because I wasn't speaking for pity. I was speaking for truth. After the service, I stayed behind. People came up one by one, hands on my shoulder, gentle words, eyes wet with quiet understanding. No one offered pity, only presence. When I stepped outside, the autumn air hit my face like a soft cloth. Leaves swirled in the breeze. The church bell rang once, low and solemn. And there he was, Gregory, leaning against his car, arms folded, looking down at the gravel like a boy waiting to be sent home from school. He looked up when he heard my steps. "Mom." I didn't rush to him. I let the moment breathe. He walked forward, not with the arrogance of a man making things right, but with the humility of a son who knew he had been wrong for far too long. "I don't know how to fix this," he said, voice cracked. "But I'm here." I nodded, letting the silence settle. Then I opened my arms. he stepped into them. And for the first time in over a year, I held my son, not the man who pushed me away, but the boy I once carried through storms, who used to bring me wild flowers and whisper stories about cloud-burping skies. He whispered, "I'm sorry, Mom." And I whispered back, "I know. No promises, no tidy endings, just warmth." And the unmistakable weight of healing beginning. Gregory offered to drive me to what was left of the house. He hadn't seen it since the fire. We didn't talk much on the way, just soft music and the rustle of wind through half-open windows. Jacob's drawing sat folded in my lap, and the locket rested on my chest, warm from my skin. When we arrived, he stopped the car and just stared. The foundation was still blackened, the walls skeletal. The trees around the property had started to grow again, timid green sprigs sprouting near the wreckage. "I should have come," he said, his voice rough. "I should have helped clean up, rebuild, something." "You still can," I said softly. "But not the house." He turned to me. "Then what?" "The trust," I replied. "The memory. The pieces of who we were and who we still might be." He stepped out of the car and walked with me to the old porch, now just cracked cement and a single upright beam. There on the edge, I knelt and buried something in the earth. The burnt remains of the frame from his graduation photo. I didn't need it anymore. Gregory knelt beside me. "We can build something new," he said. I nodded, not with hope, but with clarity. "Not from obligation, Gregory, from truth." He didn't argue. He simply took my hand. And in that moment, among ashes and silence, something rooted, not a home, but the beginning of one. A week later, Evelyn, the lawyer, called me in. She had uncovered something unexpected, a revised version of the property deed Gregory had never filed, but had written up before removing my name. It was drafted in my favor, never signed, left in limbo. She handed me a copy. "You could contest everything," she said. "You have a legal opening. You could reclaim the house, even press charges." I stared at the paper. My name was there, clear, rightful. But I thought of Gregory's hug, of Jacob's drawing, of the quiet way he'd sat beside me at the ruins. I placed the paper on her desk. "I don't want the house," I said. "Not anymore." Evelyn looked confused. "I want something stronger. A boundary, a voice, a place that can't be taken." She nodded, folding the document carefully. As I left her office, I reached into my coat pocket and felt the brass key, the one I'd carried since the fire. It didn't open anything now, but it meant something. Outside, I walked past the courthouse garden. A small child was spinning in circles, laughing as his mother called out for him to slow down. I paused, then did what I hadn't done in months. I walked to the nearest postbox, dropped the key inside, let it go. Not in anger, but in strength, because some doors don't need to be reopened. Some need to stay closed, so we can finally walk through new ones. June had a tiny garden behind the church, a patch of soil and promise between two old oak trees. She offered me a corner of it. "It's not much," she said, handing me a trowel, "but it's yours." I stood before the plot, unsure where to begin. The earth was dry, cracked in places, stubborn, like me. I knelt and placed my hands in the dirt. The first seed I planted was lavender, for calm, then rosemary, for memory. I worked slowly, carefully. Each seed was like a whisper to the future. I am still here. Gregory showed up that afternoon, a little breathless, holding a small tray of seedlings. "Tomatoes. You always said nothing beats a homegrown tomato," he said, half smiling. I took the tray. He didn't ask to help. He just knelt beside me and began pressing small holes into the earth. We didn't speak much, but the rhythm between us, plant, pat, breathe, felt sacred. "I can't undo it all," he said quietly, pressing a seedling into the ground. "I know," I replied. "You're not here to undo it. You're here to grow something new." He looked at me, really looked, eyes full of that little boy I once knew. "I'm staying," he said. And I believed him. As we finished, a breeze passed through the oaks, rustling leaves like an old lullaby. I brushed dirt from my hands, heart full, not with bitterness, but with something quieter, deeper, peace, blooming slowly. A few weeks later, June introduced me to a woman named Celeste, who ran a local housing ministry. Not a handout, she said, a fresh start. They offered me a room above the town library, modest, with slanted ceilings and a single window that caught the morning sun just right. The first night I moved in, I unpacked slowly, a few dresses, my journal, the locket. On the nightstand, I placed Jacob's drawing, and next to it, a vase of lavender from the church garden, cut that morning, still fragrant, still blooming. There was no television, no noise, just silence, but not the kind that hurt. This was the kind that made room for thought, for sleep, for breath. I stood by the window watching the town below, the bakery closing, children playing in yards, someone sweeping their porch. I no longer had a front porch, but I had a window, and I had my name. A knock came at the door. Gregory. He stood there with Jacob beside him. The boy held a small cardboard box. Inside were art supplies, pencils, brushes, a sketch pad. For when you want to tell more stories, Jacob said. But in pictures. I pulled him into a hug. Gregory didn't speak, but when he looked around the room, his eyes softened. You like it here? He asked. I nodded. I do, and I meant it, because healing doesn't always return you home. Sometimes it builds you a new one. A month later, Gregory invited me to dinner. He didn't make a show of it. No grand apology, no carefully worded invitation. Just a quiet call. Linda's out with her sister. It's just me and the kids. Would you come by? I paused before answering. Not because I doubted him, but because part of me wanted to know if I'd feel like a guest or a mother. I arrived with a peach cobbler still warm, the same recipe his grandmother had taught me. The scent filled the car, stirring old memories, birthday parties, quiet Sundays, comfort without words. Jacob opened the door before I could knock. We set a place for you. He grinned. And there it was, a plate, a fork, a napkin, a seat at their table. Gregory was in the kitchen, apron on, stirring pasta. I tried not to ruin dinner, he said sheepishly. I chuckled. You already did back in '96. That burnt lasagna is family legend. He laughed, shoulders easing. We sat, we ate, we passed bread and stories. No one spoke of the fire, or the motel, or that door slammed in the dark. We didn't need to, because sometimes redemption doesn't announce itself. It just pulls out a chair. And for the first time in too long, I didn't feel like a shadow in my son's life. I felt invited. Not because he owed me, but because he remembered and chose to remember kindly. That night, after dinner, Gregory walked me to my car. He stood beside me as I turned the key in the ignition, hesitant to leave. The porch light behind him cast a warm glow over the driveway, the same light that had once flickered when he shut the door in my face. Now it stayed steady. I know I still have a lot to earn back, he said, voice low. But I'm trying, Mom. I really am. I looked at him. Not the boy I raised, not the man who'd hurt me, but the one who finally learned how to stand beside his mother, not above her. You don't need to be perfect, I said. Just present. He nodded, swallowing emotion. As I pulled out of the driveway, I checked the mirror. He was still there, watching, waiting, not to control me, not to fix anything, just to see me off. When I reached the little apartment above the library, I turned on the lamp near the window, the one that faced the street. It was something I'd started doing every night, a light, a signal, not for him, for me, to remind myself that I was no longer waiting in the dark, that I didn't live in someone else's silence anymore. And as the light spilled gently across the wooden floor, I stood at the window and smiled, because this time I was the one who left the light on. Weeks passed. The garden grew taller. The church kitchen buzzed with new volunteers. My room above the library felt more like a home than anywhere I'd lived in years. One evening, after watering the rosemary and folding the laundry June helped me hang, I sat at my small writing desk. The journal was almost full, but I wasn't done writing. This time, I didn't start with Dear Gregory. I wrote, Dear Martha. I paused, stunned by how strange it felt to write to myself. You survived, not just the fire, not just the rejection, but the slow erosion of your voice. And you brought it back, one word at a time. You forgave, not because he deserved it, but because you deserved peace. You did not disappear. I wrote slowly, each line a thread pulled tight across the past, binding the wounds with honesty. You are not what was taken from you. You are what remains and what blooms. By the time I reached the end, my eyes were wet, but not with grief, with recognition. I folded the letter, not to mail, but to keep. A testament, not of what was lost, but of what was found. Dignity, voice, and something even stronger than love, self-worth. I tucked the letter into the back of the journal, next to Jacob's drawing and the church flyer where my name was listed as coordinator. I wasn't just remembered. I had remembered myself. It was early morning when I stepped out onto the small balcony of my apartment above the library. The city was quiet, streets glistening from last night's rain. A gentle breeze carried the scent of lavender from the church garden, faint but unmistakable. I leaned on the railing, eyes on the horizon, and thought of everything that had happened. The fire, the door slammed in my face, the silence, the letters, the journal, and Jacob's little drawing. Each memory felt heavy, yet precious, like stones laid carefully to build the foundation of who I had become. Inside, the lamp near my window glowed softly, illuminating the pages of my journal and the locket around my neck. Outside, the garden at the church bloomed small but fierce, reaching for sunlight. I realized then, life doesn't always restore what it takes. Sometimes it plants something new in its place, something that doesn't erase the past, but grows stronger because of it. I watched the world wake, and somewhere in the distance I imagined Gregory and Jacob tending to the church garden. Small hands pressing seedlings into earth, learning what I had learned, that care and presence matter more than perfection. I took a deep breath, letting the wind fill my lungs. Respect isn't inherited. It's earned day by day. I looked at my glowing window, at the life I had rebuilt, a life full of choice, strength, and quiet joy. And for the first time since the fire, I felt completely home.